Hello and welcome to The Scoop, NANP's monthly Hot Topics educational webinar series. I'm Shannon Montoya and I want to first remind you of a few things before we get started today. These calls are recorded to listen to again at your availability on the nanp.org website, including the upcoming webinar schedule. And as long as you're registered for these webinars, you will receive a link and the corresponding handouts. You can also earn one continuing education credit for participating in the Scoop webinars and taking the corresponding quiz, also found in the membership area. I would also like to invite you to share your hot educational topic with NANP. Are you doing great work in clinical research and applications? Have you started up a business or nonprofit and you'd like to share your experiences? NANP wants to highlight all that speaks to our nutrition professional community. So email me and I'd love to speak with you further. Today's webinar will conclude with a question and answer session, so I'd like to encourage you to type in your questions throughout the webinar so that we can get to as many as possible. So let's get started with our guest today, Dr. Chris Melodis, who is a naturopathic physician. Dr. Melodis is an educator and international author and lecturer and believes that when people become educated about their health, that this is when true wellness is achieved. Dr. Melodis has authored 14 books and was awarded the 2003 Naturopathic Physician of the Year by the American Association of Naturopathic Physicians. He's written over 200 nationally published wellness articles, including his most recent article in the Townsend Journal from November 2016 that he has included in the handouts today. So there's going to be two handouts in there, articles that Dr. Melodis wrote that are fantastic. I read them and they are great. And he's also served as the Chief Medical Officer and Dean of the Naturopathic Medicine for the Naturopathic College of Medicine for 7 years. I would love to welcome Dr. Melodis today. Thank you for joining us on the blood-brain barrier and demystifying curcumin bioavailability.
Well, thank you, and thank you for the warm introduction, and thank you everyone for joining us. As I was sharing it, we have a blizzard up here in Oregon, so hopefully you all are enjoying warmer weather. So in clinical practice, which I've been doing for the last 25 years, and doing lots of research, writing and publishing and going around the country lecturing, I love talking about addressing the cause of the problem. In fact, lots of times I'm in front of a crowd, and this Saturday I'll be down at the A4M lecturing, and I describe to the healthcare providers, which we all understand, but lots of our conventional colleagues look for, hey, well, what medicine do we give for XYZ condition? But the fact is we have to address the cause. And lots of times I'll say, well, my finger hurts. What would you folks recommend? And there's an audience of 200 or 300, 400 doctors. And I said, someone will say, hey, Tylenol, acetaminophen. One will say ibuprofen. Oh, you should ice it. Oh, acupuncture works well. Someone else says, oh, homeopathic arnica will work well. And I says, but wouldn't it be simpler just to remove the splinter? And so that's the concept and the philosophy of my lectures, my articles, is trying to address the cause. And so today we're going to talk about a novel approach to addressing systemic inflammation, but particularly focused on cognition, anxiety, and depression, and how do we cross the blood-brain barrier. So our learning objectives are to learn about supplemental interventions. Already from a dietary perspective, we know that the SAD diet, the standard American diet, is not the way to go, and we can go Mediterranean, we can go other directions, but I leave that to your expertise. We'll discuss the utilization of a novel curcumin supplement that actually crosses the blood-brain barrier with studies, with patents, and also we'll describe how the immune-inflammatory cytokines destroy our mind, literally from a long-term perspective with Alzheimer's disease, which we know kills more people in the United States than diabetes. So when someone says, well, I have diabetes, well, diabetes, as we know, is an accelerant for Alzheimer's. In fact, Alzheimer's is often called diabetes type 3 now because it is related to the glycation and some of the neurotangles and, of course, amyloid plaques. So the human brain is dynamic. I'm always amazed at what we're thinking about. And they actually say that the human brain is like having millions of laptops. In fact, they say it would take the equivalent of all of Central Park being covered with laptops equal 1 neuron in terms of computing function. So it's all about our connectivity, but how do we take care of this? We're taking care of our heart, we're taking care of our nervous system, we're doing things, but what are we doing to take care of our minds? And what happens when our patients come to our clinical practice? They're saying, I'm depressed, I'm anxious. Okay, well, the election is over, it is what it is, but we're still depressed. Why is that? Well, addressing the inflammatory side of things is important. We can measure blood tests, blood measurements of C-reactive protein, but sometimes C-reactive protein are normal. SED rates are normal. But what about interleukin-6 or tumor necrosis factor alpha? Things which we don't measure as often, but a person can say, I just feel inflamed. I feel like I have a head cold. I just don't feel clear. I feel foggy. Well, it can be an inflammatory process, and as we're going to discuss today, inflammation in the brain can be determined through some organic acid testing and looking at kynurenate as well. But controlling inflammation, whether it be the head or the other parts of the body, of course, will liberate the mind from anxiety, depression, and cognitive deficit. So when exposed to a stressor, anybody that's depressed is more likely to exhibit a flux, a rise in interleukin-6. That's just a fact. So if you're depressed, you're more likely to have even more suffering. So if you're already feeling like Eeyore, or your patient's feeling like Eeyore, then all of a sudden they announce, oh, looks like hurricane weather. Well, it's because they're interleukin-6. They're more primed to go pro-inflammatory. It's like it's already greased, and we need to figure out how do we lower the inflammatory cytokines to allow people to feel better, to liberate them, and once again, remove that splinter that's causing their problem. So we always think of heart disease as, oh my goodness, we have elevated C-reactive protein, that's going to cause heart disease. Yes, it contributes to heart disease, probably more so than cholesterol, many of us understand. But things like obesity and sleep loss also lead to inflammatory cytokines. They did a study of college men, and another lecture that I give, and they found that if a gentleman in college actually got 5 hours or less of sleep, their testosterone levels dropped precipitously by upwards of 25%, just from sleep deprivation. How many of us are burning the midnight candle or burning the candle at both ends and sometimes, unfortunately, in the middle? And so that sleep deprivation is causing it, but also apnea. And I diagnose 103-pound women all the time with sleep apnea. We always think, well, they have to be rotund, they have to be large, their neck circumference has to be bigger than 15.5 inches for a female, or 16.5-inch circumference for a male. But au contraire, mon frere, so to speak, because A, your partner might be snoring and having apnea, which keeps you up all night, so you might just be the tortured partner. But in addition, sleep apnea is subtle. I know when I diagnosed my wife with sleep apnea, it wasn't from her snoring. Actually, one day I woke up in the middle of the night. I said, oh, she must be out of bed, because you get that sense your partner's not in bed. She was there physically, but she wasn't breathing. So she was apneic and hypoapneic, and that causes problems. So controlling sleep apnea. And for women, it often presents with anxiety. For men, it's more presents with fatigue, but it also has to do with inflammation of the brain. Likewise, as you can see on this graphic, our fat cells affect interleukin-6. The more fat cells we have, the more inflammatory pathways we're going to be feeding. We're going to be feeding the tumor necrosis factor alpha, the interleukin-6. It's going to also affect our angiotensin, our blood pressure. And interesting, for every pound we gain another 250 miles of blood vessels. So the average human being, 150 pounds, if there's such a thing as average or normal, they have 60,000 miles of blood vessels. But you add 10 pounds, you add 2,500 miles of more blood vessels, so you're creating physical resistance, and that extra weight is causing changes in our chemistry, including resistin, leptin, adiponectin changes. So that slippery slope further causing inflammatory processes. We know that 80 million people plus have metabolic syndrome. This is why we're in business, to help these people out. But back to Eeyore, because it's all about pictures, things that our patients understand. And when patients are depressed, they're, of course, more likely to have either insomnia or excess sleep, change in appetite, libido, heart palpitations. And one of the things which I've attached in our presentation as the newsletter that I wrote in the Townsend letter was about the vagal nerve, cranial nerve number 10. And we can get inflammation of that nerve causing heart palpitations, chronic fatigue syndrome, also GI problems. And we all know the way to a person's heart is through their stomach, literally or figuratively when we talk about the vagal nerve. But if you want to mess somebody up, you just give them bad food, and we know it's going to affect 80% of their immune system, 80% of their serotonin, 60% of their, give or take, of their dopamine levels. So once again, looking at the underlying cause, and if it's strong enough to that depression can cause bowel and bladder problems, obviously this can lead to dysbiosis in contrast to eubiosis. But in addition, we're going to see disruption in menstrual cycle. But I see the same thing in our male population with andropause, and that their 24-hour cycle isn't as strong, and their testosterone levels start waxing and waning. So a great little book. It's called Depression and Bipolar, and it talks about symptoms of depression and cognitive problems, because we want to be as smart as we can be. And many of us in today's world are overwhelmed. We have excess connectivity, not from the neuronal perspective, but just excess stim. How many texts, how many emails, how many social medias, how many interactions can we handle before we eventually, like a juggler in the circus, stop being able to juggle and we epically fail? But depression leads to difficulties with concentration, distractibility, forgetfulness, memory loss, indecisiveness, all these things related to depression, which, back to the premise, inflammation contributes meaningfully to depression. So yes, an SSRI, a prescription drug, or 5-HTP may be helpful, but if you're fighting that obstacle of inflammation in the brain, we have a huge issue. Usain Bolt would not be the fastest man in the world if he had to jump hurdles, because once again, there's no hurdles in that 100-meter race. And so once again, we're trying to remove those hurdles for our patients. So when we come to a state of mind, removing those obstacles are important. So we can spend $1,000 measuring all the pro-inflammatory cytokines. It's a very expensive panel. You can get it somewhat discounted through either directlabs.com. I have no affiliation with them, but they work with Quest Diagnostics, the lab that I use a lot in my practice. But the panel's expensive. If you're going to go all the cytokines, or do you start addressing the cause and using therapeutics like optimized curcumin, which can cross the blood-brain barrier and start controlling it as an adjunct to supporting the neurochemistry. So the sad part is pro-inflammatory cytokines lower our serotonin levels. That's our happy-go-lucky, more poo or tigerish than not, and definitely not Eeyore. However, we end up being Eeyorish when our tryptophan is converted to kinourinate, which I'll show you a graphic in a moment. So we go from anabolism, or building serotonin, to catabolism and taking tryptophan and going the wrong direction. And this will also further contribute to inflammation. So yeah, we give somebody 5-HTP, but once again, some of their dietary tryptophan is going the wrong direction. That we address the inflammatory side of things, which leads to that catabolism or breakdown of tryptophan to kinurenic acid. Then, of course, we would be addressing the cause. So I do a lot of organic acid testing in my clinical practice, and I do it with an environmental pollutant panel as well. But this is just one little snapshot of the data points. It's a 3 or 4 page report. But what you'll see here is kinourinate. It's elevated, double high. And so imagine a bell-shaped curve. So this is actually the report of a 56-year-old stressed out mom that's depressed and inflamed. She just aches and has lots of pain. She's tired. She can't remember how to do some of her kids' homework. And of course, we know if we have children, doing homework can be hard. We somehow mastered it when we were there, but like, wow, did we learn this? But in this case, she legitimately was having a lot of problems. And what happens is that we see a change in the various levels. So on this particular organic acid test, which is a graphic actually from a patient result I have from US Biotech, which I asked for permission to use, 5-hydroxyindyl acetate is, of course, a measure of where your serotonin levels are. However, the dopamine, norepinephrine, epinephrine, we must fuel this. We know this from a nutritional, holistic, functional medicine perspective. We know we can do tryptophan. We can do tyrosine. However, there are obstacles to that success. Maybe we don't have enough nutrients to support that. Maybe we're low in magnesium, which is necessary for over 100 different enzyme pathways in the body. But once again, look at that big red arrow, kinourinate. And once again, that tryptophan, instead of going down to 5-HTP, is going this direction. So sure, we can give 5-HTP, and yes, it would probably help the serotonin, But even with optimal serotonin levels, why don't SSRIs, the drugs, always work? Because they haven't addressed the problem. Sure, they might make a person feel a little bit better, but once again, it's not addressing the underlying cause. So a sad commentary is that we've banned DDT. That's a good part. In 1972, yet 3.8 times higher amount of DDE, which is a metabolite of DDT, are found in patients with Alzheimer's. Why is that? Because we still import produce from countries that use DDT. So once again, where are we getting our produce? Are we eating food that is promoting health, and or are we just an overfed, undernourished society, which is actually poisoned by our foods? So the interesting little commentary here by the authors were, in the second bullet at the bottom, the authors submit that identifying people who have elevated levels of DDE and carry the ApoE allele, which is a genetic marker increasing the risk for Alzheimer's, may be an early identification for Alzheimer's. So we can be more progressive, more aggressive on treating it before it starts eroding away the brain. And this was actually in JAMA Neurology 2014. So it's the conventional wisdoms. We know this, but we need to regulate and also be aware of where did that mango or that guava or that kiwi come from and where it was used to grow it. So our pro-inflammatory cytokines, and we're going to come to solutions in a moment here. This is the platform for which we're going to discuss the bigger picture, so to speak, of solutions and why when a patient asks us what to do and what to use, it's up to us to give them the best recommendation. And I think most of us are often frustrated with a patient that comes in, a client, and they say, oh, I've already tried magnesium. Yeah, but what magnesium did you try? Well, magnesium oxide. I got it at XYZ box store. Yeah, magnesium oxide is not very well absorbed. Or, well, I've tried ginkgo. Well, what kind of ginkgo? Well, I got it at this discount place. Okay, well, this discount place might be good. It might not be good, but was it 24% ginkgo flavonoid glycosides? And how was the process? Oh, I got it for $3 a bottle. $3 a bottle for 60-count ginkgo. I think it costs more than $3 a bottle to make. Something's wrong with that picture. But they're counting on us to make those professional recommendations of high-quality supplements. So as you can see here in the bold section, pro-inflammatory cytokines trigger changes in serotonergic, noradrenergic, and dopaminergic neurotransmission that mirrors those observed in depression. So if we can treat the inflammatory aspects of the human body, the 50 to 100 trillion cells, some minimize it down to 10 trillion cells, but regardless, it's a lot. I say 50 trillion cells minimally. It's like, wow, wouldn't that make sense to address the underlying cause of the problem? So this is a fun little slide, and I actually have a couple slides along this line as just added little tidbits which speak to us as functional medicine holistic providers. That dysbiosis of the gut microbiota is associated with mental disorders such as schizophrenia, anxiety, and, of course, major depressive disorders. There's also evidence that indicates commensal bacteria and or pathogenic bacteria will lead to inflammatory process. We know that. But that the gut microbiota can actually synthesize things like serotonin, which is our happy-go-lucky. It's also neuroinhibitory, and GABA, which is definitely neuroinhibitory. So what happens if we actually worked on the gut? And once again, all disease begins in the gut concept, which is an edict of so many fields of holistic medicine that indeed we interface with the outside world in large part by what comes through past our lips and down our gullet. And so interesting, Lactobacillus brevis, Bifidobacterium dentum are synthesizers of this. And lo and behold, more slides. So if you want to have an article I wrote on the gut and neurotransmitters, just email me. My slides will, my last slide of the day will actually have my email, drmelitas@gmail. That's all about the 99th monkey. We together can have a collective impact more than any one of us individually. We learn from one another. But as you can see here, number 4, lactobacillus can also synthesize acetylcholine. Well, why would I highlight that? Because memory neurotransmitter, not only is it neuromuscular, but of course acetylcholine is one of those things that the drug category tries to enhance with acetylcholinesterase inhibitors. But why, how about building some more of it and actually allowing our gut to actually nourish our happiness and our contentment? We know the way to a person's heart is through their stomach, but also this is, of course, how we feel poorly. Number 5, by the way, I just added in that Lactobacillus acidophilus enhances expression of cannabinoid receptors, of which there's at least 2 in the human brain. So we lose a brain cell per minute, or actually, sorry, per second. So that's 1 Mississippi, 2 Mississippi, 3 Mississippi. That's 86,400 brain cells per day we're losing, and that's on a good day. Good antioxidants, good diet, don't have inflammation, don't have other confounding variables, including drugs like HMG-CoA inhibitors, the statins, further eroding away the mitochondria. But assuming all of this, we're losing 86,400 brain cells per day. So that's a lot. There's a picture of me. And let's talk about clinicians, us. And how do we help deliver a supplement that actually works? So we know in our field, turmeric, actually curcumin, has been pervasive. It's growing. Everybody's saying, ours is the best, ours is the best. But let's look at it through a lens of what are we looking for as to the best? The best marketing or the science showing bioavailability, the pharmacokinetics, the safety index, and does it get to the target tissues? So there's an inherent weakness about turmeric. It does not absorb well from the gut. Well, there's research showing that people in India have less Alzheimer's. Well, they have turmeric on everything, and so by sheer volume, they might actually get some benefits, but they also eat more vegetarian, they eat a little closer to the land, so there's a lot of confounding variables there. But let's look at the marketplace. So we have phytosomes. Phytosomes are very crude, soy lecithins, low purity, and they're very common in our marketplace, pervasive, so to speak. Then there's the non-shelf stable, non-gut stable nanoparticles. That's a whole nother marketing skew. And then there's a UCLA patented curcumin, which has actually been shown to bypass the first pass of the liver and actually go into the lymphatics and actually deliver through the blood-brain barrier into the brain the ability to have this anti-inflammatory, antioxidant properties. And we'll talk more about that. So when we look at the research, we want to look at safety first and foremost, because after all, we all have the same premise: do no harm. And my philosophy is very simple with my patients. They ask, are there any problems with X, Y, Z? Could there be a side effect? And I say, if it's strong enough to have a positive effect, if it can alter your biochemistry in a positive direction, it would be possible that you can have a negative reaction. So the first thing we want to do is make sure that if we're going to give a curcumin, for example, that we're actually giving curcumin and not just a curcuminoid. So we want to be looking for deliverability, and also has it been shown to be studied in humans as being safe. And just because there's one piece of literature on an herb, and let's go way back 10, 15 years ago, a book that I wrote was called Safe Herbs. Right when I was writing that book for DK Publishing, there was all this scare about kava, and people were getting liver failure. That's because they had taken kava lactones and concentrated them with acetone to pharmaceutical levels, far more than the Polynesian cultures use indigenously, and they actually made it a quasi-drug where, once again, 30% of natural medicines are the source of our drugs. Think about foxglove, that's digitalis. We have vinacristin, that's a chemo drug, from periwinkle. We have all these different meds, but we're doing the same thing in our field. We need to make sure there's a safety index. So a product I use in my clinical practice is Longvita, and I'm going to go over some of the research. This is not an infomercial. This is just looking at what you should be asking, whichever curcumin you're using, is it meeting standards that you can feel good about? Because after all, our patients are counting on us. So you need to make sure it's proven performance, and does it cross the blood-brain barrier? Because the whole premise of this lecture is we're looking for the ability to target the brain. It was Thomas Edison that said the most important function of the body is to carry around the brain. So we need to look at constant research. We need to look at placebo-controlled, randomized, blinded clinical trials. We need to look at where's the research coming from. So NIH research, university backgrounds, and making sure that there's a lot of information that's saying, yes, traditional people have used this. It makes sense that we would use this, but we want to make sure we don't lose our trend. I'm going to give you another example. St. John's wort. St. John's wort became quite famous with the LA Buying Club for HIV-positive individuals back in the late 80s. because they were using it because it has antiviral properties. We think of St. John's wort as an antidepressant, so it's side benefit. But we started concentrating to 0.3% hypericin. And then we said, oh, no, that's not it. It's 4% hyperforin. We started going and trying to determine what was this traditional herb which has been used forever for depression, and how can we make it chemically better? And the question is, sometimes we throw out baby with the bathwater, and we need to look at deliverables. And if we look here at the continued education aspects of things, we also look at the fact there's effective in one dose. So the question is, do you want to have a patient taking multiple doses throughout the day? I can tell you after 25 years of practice, compliance goes down dramatically after one dose. Sometimes I'll get a patient to do AM, PM, but if I'm doing 3 times a day or more, it's not happening. Well, the research shows here that a single dose of curcumin actually allowed for a meaningful delivery of free curcumin. And that's the key when we're looking at the research, free curcumin. And so once again, I have no ownership in this company, but this is the product which, once again, using their research as a measure, this is what I look at with all the curcumins that cross my desk. I says, can you meet or beat these standards? And so far, the answer is definitively no, they can't. Whereas a typical phospholipid, where there's a lot of them out in the marketplace, there's very little curcumin being delivered that's free. And the free form is a bioactive form, the form that's going to get the deliverables. And you can see 2 points of reference here from the scientific literature. The half-life of curcumin delivered via long vita is right around the 7-hour mark, whereas the other forms is very short because it's all processed through the liver and glucuronidated, and as a result, glucuronidated, inactivated, not permeable to the brain, is not going to get the job done. And I always target the brain as one of my benchmarks, is something getting systemic to the level that it can enter intracellularly. Because if we can cross the blood-brain barrier, then we look at red blood cell magnesium, red blood cell zinc. We say, okay, well, that's how I'm measuring whether a person's zinc status is good, amongst other measures. I want to see, can it get intracellular? Can it cross through the toughest of tissues? So UCLA neuroscientists have researched this product. It crosses the blood-brain barrier to deliver free curcumin, the bioactive form. It's 67 to 285 times more bioavailable than 95% curcumin. And it's like, wow, okay, that's remarkably big numbers, because once again, a good product taken and say, hey, this is a great product. And in vitro studies, outside of the body studies, will show, look at it, it has bioavailability, it does all these wonderful things. But once we go in vivo, or the human version of things, it's like, okay, well, it's not getting absorbed from the gut, so it looks good on paper, but it's not getting the job done. Plus, single dosing, very important. Safety, generally recognized as safe, non-GMO compliant, simple deliverables. And the concept here is it crosses over because of a special solid lipid curcumin particle matrix that crosses over, goes into the bloodstream, and most importantly, hits our target tissues. When a patient comes to you, they say, I have XYZ condition, we can give them a supplement, but if it doesn't get absorbed, and lots of times we have patients with leaky gut, malabsorption, we're like, wow, their blood levels aren't changing, they're not feeling any better. I was pretty certain that my prescribing was right. It seemed so clear at the moment, and it's because it fell short. It was the right prescription, but it wasn't the right deliverable form. And the uniqueness of this product is that it enables uptake through the lymphatic system by delivering to target tissues via chylomicrons. So novel delivery of something that's been used by indigenous people for extensive millennia. Then we look at the crossing the blood-brain barrier, the tri-lipid technology, but interesting, water dispersible. This is a key because after all, we're largely water. So it's great to have something that's lipid soluble, but making it water dispersible is important, and the lymphatic system delivery is important. In 2015, I'll send you this article. If you email me at drmelisa@gmail, you'll see that there was research showing there's a direct lymphatic connection that was discovered in some monkey research. They actually finally preserved the brain sufficiently. They found that there's lymphatics and other ways things are being delivered to the brain other than through just a blood-brain barrier. So unrelated to this particular product. But once again, we think we know so much, and we must stay humble that the human body is very dynamic and very complex. So here's the science. Here's the chemistry. What you see with a Longvita product is it goes into the intestine. After all, we swallowed it. It goes through the stomach, and it goes into our lymphatics through the chylomicron, and lymphatic transport, free curcumin into the blood and the target tissues, followed by the typical metabolism. What's the typical metabolism? Well, it goes to the portal vein, goes to the liver, metabolized, and undergoes glucuronidation, and then it's excreted. So, but once again, that's why we like to use topicals, like on hormones. We avoid that first pass. Once again, you grab onto something by the liver is going to munch on a large quantity of things. In the case of curcumin, the vast majority, as the graphs have shown. So once again, getting it delivered through lymphatic, very important. Here's another visual for those that like pictures a little bit more. We can see the typical absorption in the portal vein. And I tell all my patients, if you have not having the Bristol chart, which is a stool test, where you say type 1, type 2, type 3, what kind of stool do you have? I said, well, if you have a drier stool, type 1 or type 2, well, what happened to all that moisture? I said, that muddy water. Well, you're reabsorbing it. That liver that you worked so hard to get it into your GI tract gets to deal with yesterday along with today's burdens. So we want to be nice to our liver, and we want to minimize the things that it has to process from the get-go. So once again, Longvita goes from the lymphatic system to the bloodstream, to the brain, the target tissues, and then it's excreted. Once again, UCLA developed to overcome absorption issues. So novel approach, just like we use topicals. We use different ways to get things done. Well, this actually takes that burden off the liver, prevents that immobilization and inactivation, and once again, very clever. And if you look at a 95% curcumin that's out in the marketplace compared to Longvita, you will see that there's a 65-time absorption of free curcumin after a single dose. So once again, 1 pill a day. Now, my patients often leave my practice with multiple prescriptions of supplements, botanicals, herbals, dietary recommendations. Don't do this, don't do that, drop your carbs by 20%. But they get to a point of being overwhelmed. We all see this as clinicians. And so the key is, if we introduce something to them, we see benefits. One of the things which I could go on for an hour plus on is that Longvita is also used for muscle issues and aches and pains and exertional anti-inflammatory properties as well. Today's lecture is on the neurochemistry and the brain and inflammatory processes. But remember, it has broad systemic anti-inflammatory pathways, and I'm hoping to actually give another lecture on the properties of controlling the inflammatory processes for all those CrossFitters out there or weekend warriors. So Longvita's optimized curcumin, and it affects, once again, contentedness. I had never seen that word in print before, and I love that word now, but the research looked at contentedness. Promotes neurogenesis. Once again, we're losing brain cells, but once again, we have neuroplasticity. We have the ability to recreate connectivity within our brain. And so if you look here at the slides and where the research is at, they actually look here at a 2008 and 2009 study, and Longvita, not curcuminoids, upregulated neurogenesis markers of synaptophysin in Alzheimer's patients. And once again, very small dosing. This was in a mouse study because, of course, the IRBs, Institutional Review Boards, are obviously not going to let that happen at the human level. And we look at the bioavailability. Once again, both, if we compare it to the various other curcumins and Longvita competitors out in the marketplace, it's not about competition. It's about which is the best product. And so we want to look at the absorption. Longvita has the pharmacokinetic studies. It has a free curcumin detection in the plasma that is not undergone the glucuronidation. It has the ability to enable first and second pass metabolism. And so as a result, it is important to look at deliverables and total outcomes. So I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this slide because you're more than capable of reading it, but I will say that many of the studies on curcumins out in the marketplace, which are really not curcumins, they're really glucuronidated curcumin because they're done out in the test tube scenario and there's some cheats along the way, but there's failed in Alzheimer's studies, failed in the cardiovascular studies. But look what Longvita can do. It can help with cyclooxygenase 2, nitric oxide, interleukin-6, and there's even some studies showing it might suppress some cancer cell growth as well. But amyloid beta binding properties. So once again, our little guy that keeps on popping across the screen here, reminding us there's a lot of research out there, and taking care of our microglia is also very important, but anti-inflammatory. If there's any single thing, remember our depressed patients, our anxious patients, they're not thinking clearly. They're also not happy. They're living miserable existences that are so unnecessary, and it's because their brain is not uninflamed, it's inflamed. Welcome to our diet. Welcome to our society. Welcome to lack of sleep. Welcome to all the challenges that occur within the human body as a result of modern living. As I tell my patients, we're no longer in Kansas. We're no longer Little House on Prairie, the Charles and Caroline Ingalls scenario. And when we look at curcumin, but not placebo, there's significant lowering of plasma triglyceride values. So there's other properties other than inflammatory. Salivary amylase levels, a measure of stress, dropped. It raises salivary radical scavenging capacity, raises the plasma catalase activities, and lowers plasma beta amyloid protein concentrations. And this was the Longvita study from the Nutrition Journal, 2012. And as you can see here, they did studies on, does it help you with your brain? Does it help you with your daily function? Because after all, that's what our patients want. And the answer is yes, it does. So 80 milligrams, so it's a 400 milligram or 500 milligram capsule that's delivering 80 milligrams of curcumin as a deliverable. That's that single dose per day. And they showed that after an hour, there was increased vigilance and accuracy. After serial 3 subtractions, dramatic increase in accuracy, both acutely and for people that took it long term. And if you look here, they did a study and they looked at the average mood change following a battery of tests. So imagine all of a sudden we were put on a spot, a rapid fire, test, question. Well, over the course of time, our alertness would go down, our contentedness, well, like, why did I sign up for this? Our calmness, calmness went out the window after the 4th question, that barrages. Our stress went up. Our fatigue went up because we got exhausted from the mental barrage, and our anxiety went up. Once again, we were wondering, why do we sign up to do this test? Well, the study shows that with Longvita, total fatigue went down from that barrage. And once again, improvement in fatigue on day 30, a cumulative effect. You're investing in changing the chemistry. So much of society is that quick fix. And there are the quick fixes. You saw that after just an hour, there was an improvement in performance. But once again, we're changing the trillions of cells and the metabolic imbalances within the body. The physical fatigue went down. And likewise, contentedness and contentment. So once again, that new word that I fell in love with, contentedness. And we got Longvita. There's less challenges over the course of time. There's greater improvement over the course of time. And so once again, people are happier because guess what? My guess is there's less inflammation. Totally unrelated to Longvita. Have you ever been in a grocery store supermarket and it's a sunny day outside and it's been kind of miserable, and like I'm looking at a snowstorm outside right now as I'm talking, and people all of a sudden, it's a sunny day and people are talking. Normally they stand in line and look down, try to avoid eye contact. Now they're engaged in conversation. Why is that? Well, research shows that even exposure to sunlight short-term lowers interleukin-6. That was actually in a psychology journal, I think it was in 2015, that showed that, once again, we're seeing those changes in the chemistry of the human body and less inflammation in the brain. A less inflamed brain is a much happier brain. So Swinburne, which is well known for very progressive research, looked at the improvement in the number of correct responses after merely an hour of taking Longvita. And then they looked at the 3-hour mark and the 30-day mark. And once again, constant improvement and sustained improvement. So once again, how many people want to have that little extra edge in life? A lot. We know about what a normal neurotangle looks like. Then we see the neurofibrillary tangles, and we see amyloid plaques accumulating, things which we don't want to see. Well, Longvita has been studied, and that's actually one of the genesis and the preambles to why Longvita was created and researched at UCLA, because late-stage interventions with curcumin reduced soluble tau oligomers, but not insoluble ones, and corrected cognitive and synaptic deficits. So this was a 2011 study from where? The Alzheimer's Center, UCLA. So I'm just sharing what they have came up with. It's a product that's available to us. I use it on a daily basis. My wife uses it on a daily basis because we both have Alzheimer's in our family. Plus, we also want to protect the brain that we were gifted. Then we look at the anti-inflammatory effects of a novel standardized solid lipid curcumin formulation. If you want, I can get you a copy of this article. This was actually a 2014 article in the Journal of Medicinal Food, showing once again the research and the dedicated researchers around the world looking for delivering an ingredient, just like there's boswellias and there's other products. There's pomelo, which of course another thing which I'd be more than glad to share some slides on, which shows there are different kinds of pomegranate. There's different kinds of things. Just like if we tell a patient of ours, go take cranberry juice because they might have a bladder infection, we're not just going to tell them to take any kind of cranberry. We're going to guide them to the one that we believe is the most effective. The other thing which is interesting, and once again, these slides are available for you, so I'm not going to read through all of this, but an in vivo study in 2015 showed huge changes in interleukin levels with curcumin. And once again, controlling the interleukin-6, controlling the interleukin-1 beta, which is a central nervous system issue here. We want to control it so that our brains are liberated from the bogginess and the confusion and the disease promotion. They say that inflammation contributes to at least 25% of all cancers. I can also share with you that research if you want to as well. So once again, other things like tumor necrosis factor, interferon gamma, we're seeing the changes in the chemistry, and the proof is in the pudding, so to speak. And once again, this was in vivo 2015, a wonderful journal, well worth the read. But what about our eyes? Could our eyes be related to Alzheimer's disease? Well, let's talk about that. Here in the journal Eye 2015, they said there are many possible reasons for the association between age-related vision changes and cognitive impairment. One thing, you're not seeing things, so you're not experiencing things very well. And as a result, you're not integrating memories, just like a person with hearing issues. But one of the things is there is amyloid beta, an extracellular deposit found in the senile plaques in the brain that are also present in the drusen, which is the yellow pigment in the back of the retina. And there's a correlation there that there's large amounts in individuals with age-related macular degeneration, and the researchers have suggested that the presence of amyloid beta in the drusen may accelerate inflammation in AMD and might contribute to the senile plaques also in Alzheimer's. So the article is called Dementia of the Eye, the Role of Amyloid Beta in Retinal Degeneration. So now we're talking about a product that can cross the blood-brain barrier and helps with amyloid plaque and might help with vision, question mark, question mark. Kind of interesting. So here's a long Vita study, which actually shows it binding to the retinal amyloid after a single dose. So once again, a tool. And has vascular effects. A whole lecture that I give is on how to improve nitric oxide. We all know that nitric oxide level has a half-life of 3 to 5 seconds in the human body. It diminishes with age, and by the age of 40, it's about half of what it used to be. We don't expand our blood vessels. So for a male, it might present with erectile dysfunction or hypertension, likewise in a female, or decreased lubrication in the vaginal area. But it also affects other aspects of coronary health and the ability to deliver nutrients throughout the body. So increasing nitric oxide basically allows us to broaden our irrigation system and deliver more deliverables to the target tissues. So you can see like something like Long Vita, which helps there, also is ultimately helping with other nutrients, because when you support that nitric oxide levels, you're going to see a myriad of other benefits. There's also research showing that nitric oxide improvement can help with depression, help with fatigue, and lessen anxiety in one study by 50%. So there's these multiplicities of approaches. So this was an Ohio State University study showing that amyloid beta decreases the plasma beta amyloid. And once again, after 30 days, there's a decrease. There's a decrease in the physiological stress as measured by salivary amylase. So don't think digestion here. Think of it as a marker of, once again, excess amylase, and now it's being controlled. Decreased C-reactive protein and increased total antioxidants. So sadly enough, I wrote an article about almost 8 years ago that coffee is the #1 antioxidant for many Americans, many Germans, and many Spaniards. And once again, if we're counting on Starbucks to save us, we got problems if that's where we're getting our antioxidants. Also, in Ohio State University, reduced blood lipid levels to triglycerides, improved vascular function, endothelial nitric oxide, as well as a vascular adhesion molecule, VEGF, and reduce oxidative stress. The catalase is a total antioxidant. Nutrition Journal, 2012. And the studies, once again, 67 times using capacity over the Cmax, 95% area under the curve. And once it's normalized, 850 times. Free intact curcumin getting delivered, developed through UCLA neuroscientists across the blood-brain barrier. And as we know, as clinicians, we're looking for all these things across the page, so to speak. We're looking for brain and cognitive improvement. Tell me which patient doesn't have some challenge at some level. Every once in a while, I find an 80, 85-year-old patient of mine that I wish my brain would be close to theirs at that age. But that's our wish, or is that what we're working towards? Amyloid beta binding, microglial function, controlling the inflammatory pathways systemically, helping with exercise recovery, like I said, a whole nother lecture that I could give. And so our little puffball just came by again, and we're changing the biochemistry. We're improving the ecology of the body. And compared to other products out there which require very high dosing, I'm not going to mention the products, even though I know what they are. Product X, product Y, product Z, very common in the marketplace, requiring very large clinical doses. Longvita, 400 milligrams per day, one pill. So, proven performance, blood-brain barrier, credible science, UCLA studied, and the amount of research occurring related to the inflammatory pathways, related to the exercise. There's another 12 to 14 studies in the queue relative to college, university, and NIH grants on the benefits of the permeability of Longvita and the free curcumin. And remember, the half-life of curcumin on the average product, it's negligible. And once again, the free curcumin is negligible on phospholipid curcumins out in the marketplace, whereas the Longvita was shown to have great brain permeability, and it diminished the glucuronidation of curcumin, even though eventually it will get metabolized. The whole key is release it, let it flood and flourish throughout the body, and then let it get metabolized. And so the summary here is we have to treat the cause of the problem. If they have sleep apnea, we have to deal with it. If they have inflammation, we have to deal with it. If it's poor diet, not enough iodine, too much fluoride, we need to deal with it. Another lecture I give on how iodine and fluoride and not enough iodine and too much fluoride lowers the IQ. Whole lecture series I give. Longvita, optimized curcumin, anti-inflammatory support, neurosteroidal and neurotransmitter support, and probiotics to support brain chemistry, support that acetylcholine, support that serotonin, support that dopamine levels, which is contentment. And important when you have patients with libido issues, if dopamine's low, remember dopamine helps feed into oxytocin, which is the desire to cuddle, be romantically involved, and be nurtured. Lots of children with autism, another lecture I give, they're low in oxytocin. There's ways in which we can support these pathways. And once again, doing organic acid testing, measuring the MTHF and COMT enzymes, looking for epigenetic factors, all very important. So as you can see here, Dr. Miletus at Gmail, feel free to field whatever questions you have to me. If you want more research, hey, Dr. Miletus, you mentioned this. This will be great for my clinical practice, because together we're stronger. I speak quickly because I know the audience I'm speaking to knows a lot of this. The key here is to deliver pearls that are interesting, compelling, and that allow you to ask the next big question. And as I went to the National College of Natural Medicine, now called National University of Natural Medicine in Portland, Oregon, oldest naturopathic college, we were taught things that my predecessors learned as truths and truisms. Well, it's up to us either to continue just learning and repeating what they did, or challenge the question and ask, what is the next big thing that we can help the next generation and impart additional grown knowledge opposed to just the same knowledge? So I thank you each one and all, and I'm open to some questions. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Dr. Miletus. That was really informational. We do have a couple questions. One of them is from Ashley, and she's curious. You had mentioned when you were talking about apnea that men and women have different signs and symptoms of sleep deprivation. Could you mention that again and describe the difference between men and women with the sleep deprivation and fatigue?
Yeah. So women can, of course, be fatigued from sleep deprivation. It seems, and once again, it depends on what station in life you are. Are you premenopausal or menopausal? My menopausal patients do end up being a little bit more tired. My premenopausal patients seem to just have such tenacity. They work through that fatigue, and as a result, they're working on vapors, and they're anxious, and they will often have GI issues. And that's not, once again, saying one gender versus another gender, and it has to be an absolute, just a trend that I see. Guys will say, I'm just tired. They're more like Al Bundy on Married with Children. Come home, remote controlled, and nada. Whereas the women come in with anxiety, and they're out of sorts, and they can't figure out what's causing the problem. We find that, lo and behold, their oxygenation levels diminish. But can a woman be tired and a man be anxious? Yes. But I see this unique trend just clinically over 25 years, where I would have 10 years ago missed a lot of my female patients with anxiety and not knowing it was sleep apnea related. But now I see this trend. I say, well, let's do a sleep apnea test. And people say, oh, and especially if they're anxious or stressed, they don't want to go to a facility and be tested. So I often will do a home sleep study. They'll be monitored at home in their own bed with their partner, and then they'll say, hey, okay, in my own bed with my own pillow, with my cat or dog laying on me, with my own allergens and my house plants, this is how I slept. I either passed or I failed, and now let's make sure we get into sleep. Because after all, what I tell all my patients is, you look at the word restoration, like restoring the body. The first four letters are rest, R-E-S-T. So we're not resting the body. We can eat all the great foods in the world, but it's not going to be metabolized properly. It's not going to be nourished, and the body's going to still remain tired.
Right. And so when you're working with your clients, I would imagine that you're doing quite a bit of testing. You mentioned some of the tests that you use. Are you generally just getting a baseline of where your clients are? And what are some of the tests that are kind of your first go-to to kind of, evaluate where your clients are when you first see them?
Well, the first thing I do, of course, is do the basics, the CBC with differential, the comp metabolic. And for those that don't have licensure that allows for lab ordering, a patient can order directly from directlabs.com. I'm not affiliated with them whatsoever, but I have patients around the world that come to see me. It's not about me. It's just that we're unique as healthcare providers. And when they find us, whomever we are, including all of you folks, they glom onto us. But all I'll do is I'll say, go ahead and go to directlabs.com. You can order your own lab work. Here's what I want you to do. I'll say I want a CBC, I want a ferritin, of course I want a vitamin D level, and they can go onto that site, and it will be ran through Quest Diagnostics. I'm also not associated with them. And then you have that data. But I like to also, as you can see here, do neurotransmitter testing, organic acid testing, to see how that Krebs cycle is working. Do we have too much alpha-ketoglutarate? And if you want, I can give a lecture on that topic, because I do a whole 2-hour lecture on organic acids. I can make more brief, but it's very phenomenal. And also the MTHF COMT markers, if they're anxious, if they're not detoxifying, the proverbial coal miner's canary. I'm one of them. I'm a 677T double mutated MTHF. I can smell the faintest little smell. I come home and I say, was somebody here? No. It's kind of musky smell. Are you sure? And it's a candle upstairs in the bedroom, and I'm 30 feet away from it and 4 rooms away, because once again, I'm environmentally sensitive because of my inability to methylate properly. So I love to look at methylation. I like to look at organic acids, neurotransmitters, and then foundational. Do I have enough red blood cells, CBC? How's my immune system? Are my neutrophils elevated? And or do I have liver problems, kidney problems? Or how's my thyroid, which is the human metronome? And, of course, for sex hormones, I have 30-year-old men which are asking for Viagra, because 25% of men at the age of 30 have low testosterone. I wrote a book called His Change of Life. Well, likewise, women have the same challenge. If you have apnea, for example, your gonads, ovaries, testicles, are not being oxygenated, and they're going from grapes to raisins. They're shriveling up, and their function diminishes.
Interesting. So you get a lot of information and put it all together and use these protocols with these very well quality assurance type botanicals, and find
that's a key.
Amazing results. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Yeah, and that's the key. That's the key. Just like we know, there's now magnesium threonate, which is a special one for the brain that helps penetrate the brain. It's just looking for the best research and making sure the human clinical trials are there, and that it's not just an animal study or an in vitro study. So in this case, optimized curcumin. I can give a similar lecture on picking the right pomegranate or the right boswellia, because not all boswellias are created equal. But if you think about it, and I'm going to finish on this note, and sorry for interrupting, but think about a sunflower seed. If you have a sunflower you grew last year and you took the head of the sunflower and took all the seeds and you're going to plant them next year to dry them out properly, but you decide I'm going to do an experiment. I'm going to plant one in my front yard, one in my backyard, one along the sidewalk, one in a parking lot where I go to work, and then one along a strip of a busy street. Even though they came from the same mother plant, each of those sunflower plants over that next summer will look different, be nourished different, have a different ecology. So knowing where a plant was raised, how it was raised, how it was harvested, so from seed to bottle is very, very important, because otherwise it could theoretically be a sunflower, but the little sunflower that grew along that very harsh plot of land in a parking lot in the middle of the urban development is not going to produce the same seed next time or the same nutrients.
Right. Eileen is asking, who does your organic acid testing? Is that through Direct Labs as well?
Direct Labs, I go actually directly to US Biotech. I've actually used US Biotech, which I'm also not affiliated with, for since like 1989. They've gone through 3 or 4 names during that period of time, but it's ran by husband and wife, Raymond and Margaret Soon, up in Seattle, and they're just great folks, and they do lots of research, and they actually got an award for being perfect on their last CLIA cola, which is unheard of. You know, this is like an IRS audit, and they're saying, wow, we're so impressed. So yeah, this is US Biotech. So this slide here.
Aha. Oh, great. Thank you for pulling that back up.
And if you call them, they actually give you this beautiful Krebs cycle graphic for free. That's 2 pieces of paper put together, but it's 1 piece of paper is a large piece, and you can talk to your patients about the Krebs cycle. So yeah, they're just great folks. They're very big on education.
Fantastic. Thank you for sharing that and that little piece of information. So I think this is going to wrap up our get together today. Dr. Mellitus, thank you for so much information and research that we can look up. Dr. Mellitus also included his most recent article from the Townsend letter and an article on the vagal nerve, which I found to be very fascinating. So take a look at those. Dr. Mellitus can be... There he is, Dr. Mellitus at gmail.com. Thank you for joining us today, Doctor.
Hey, thank you all, and may you all have a wonderful and blessed day. Take care.
All right, safe travels.
Thanks.
So I want to thank you all for joining us for today's recording and broadcast. If you have questions, again, please contact Dr. Mellitus. And in January, mark your calendars for the 12th of January, where Kathleen Bell will join us with nutritional and developmental needs for children from infancy to age 7. So mark your calendars again for January 12th, 2017, and have a great rest of your day. Thanks for joining us.